Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Premier Life podcast. Thanks for tuning in with us this week. And this week, we're going to talk about something that many of you might not have heard of, and that is something that's called primitive reflexes. And what a primitive reflex is they are found commonly, most often in babies. When we start to develop, our body was designed to have these reflexes to basically help babies survive as they're starting to develop, grow, and figure out what life is. So basically, a primitive reflex is an innate, automatic response, either because of a stimuli or because of a neuro pathway in the brain, which tells the body to respond in a certain way. So when the body starts to develop embryologically, we have something that's called the notochord. And the notochord is at the very top part of the fetus as it's developing. And that's what forms the original part of the brain, which is the brainstem. And as developmental happens within the utero, the brainstem starts to grow and the brain moves upward and it develops from bottom to top and then from back to front. And as life goes on, the brain starts to develop and really isn't truly formed until we reach about 26 years of age. That's when the frontal lobe is fully developed. And then the brain develops from the right hemisphere to the left and then back and forth. So really and truly, the brain is amazing in how it develops, but the reason why it is because we have things like these primitive reflexes, which is so important for that brain development. So as babies start to get to the point where labor is initiated, things like primitive reflexes start to take hold. So in order for a baby to come through the birth canal, there are a couple of reflexes that are initiated in the brain, which start to show up, which allows that birth process to happen. So as the baby descends within the uterus down into that canal, they have to do a couple of movements. One reflex is called the gallant reflex, which allows for a little bit of rotation. So think of the baby trying to descend, and then it has to kind of corkscrew, move the shoulders to kind of descend a little bit. And then they have to do a type of extension mechanism to help it fully descend and to fully get out of the womb and to fully be delivered. So these reflexes really are important because what we start to see is when babies don't have these reflexes, we start to see delayed in milestones and we start to see issues with development. So now that we've talked a little bit about what primitive reflexes are, we're going to talk about why they're important. As I mentioned, a lot of these primitive reflexes should happen within the first 0 to 3 years of age. Some of them are integrated at different points, and some of them stay along a little longer. And when those reflexes are retained, we start to see issues with development. We see delayed milestones. We see issues with speech development. We see issues with motor development. And really and truly, it's a major problem because it indicates to us that there is a problem with the brain development. No child who is born, no parent wants to have issues with those sort of things. Everybody wants their children to be on schedule. And the world has really done a crummy job of allowing those developmental things to be delayed because the harsh reality is we have all these toxins, we have all these traumas, we have all these medications that are causing these delayed milestones. So some of the reasons why these primitive reflexes never develop or are retained and stay along a lot longer is because we have such a high rate of C-sections. When babies are born via C-section, it increases the amount of tension and pressure on the upper cervical spine by about 50 to 60%. Okay, so the normal amount of force from a vaginal delivery is about 50 to 80 newtons of force. When we're talking about a C-section, that can cause an additional 150 to 180 newtons of force on the upper cervical spine, okay? And again, when they're not descending through that birth canal, they're not developing those primitive reflexes to really, truly integrate into the brain so that development can happen the way that it was designed to, Okay, so C-sections are a big reason why we have those delays of those primitive reflexes. Other things, medications, all of the toxins that we're encountering, and any traumas that occur, within the first year, 2 years, 3 years of life. Okay. So really and truly, when we're talking about these primitive reflexes, we want these things to happen and we want them to be integrated into the brain appropriately. That way our babies start to do the things that they're designed to do. They're designed to crawl, they're designed to walk, and that they reach them in the amount of time in which God designed the body to do. That way we don't have issues further down the road. Okay. So when we're talking about these types of things, there are 5 big primitive reflexes that are super important. And the first one is called the rooting reflex. And so this is found in newborns. So if you take your finger and you swipe from the edge of the mouth back towards the ear, the baby should either turn their head or they should open their mouth. Now, this one is really important because this helps with that sucking concept, and it helps really with the breastfeeding concept. So some problems arise with newborns who have issues with breastfeeding. This can be part of the issue why that this primitive reflex never really developed the way that it should have. Okay. Then we have another primitive reflex that's called palmar grasp, in which you take your finger, you strike from the bottom of the hand up to the bottom parts of the fingers, and babies should curl their fingers underneath the finger, grab hold real tight. Okay. Should be checked on both sides. This is really important because babies need to start that sensation so that they can grasp objects, so that they can start to develop those things needed for crawling, pulling themselves up, which then lead into other developments down the road. Okay. Another really important primitive reflex is something that's called the gallant reflex. And the gallant reflex is if you lay a baby on their stomach, you should be able to swipe down the side of their spine from about the bottom part of the rib cage to the top part of the hip, and they should bend towards that direction. Again, this reflex is one of the ones that's needed for babies to descend within that birth canal to be born into the world. And that kind of helps with the scrunching, and that's really important for crawling. So babies who, never really developed the great cross crawl mechanism, the people who you see have more of that army crawl, or they do the scooch, or they never really crawl the way that they're supposed to. A lot of times it's because this reflex never fully integrated. One other reflex is the Babinski reflex, and that's when you take the bottom of a baby's foot and you start from the edge of the heel, you swipe up the lateral side, so the outside edge, and then you go across the top of the foot like this, right underneath the toes, and you make a 7. And if it's on the other side, then it's an opposite 7. And what the toe should do is the big toe should extend upwards and the other toe should flare outward. This one is really important for crawling because one of the biggest things that babies have a problem with when they're learning to crawl is they can't get their toes underneath them to do that push-off mechanism. And this reflex helps them with that ability to do those things. Also really important when they're starting to pull themselves up and when they're starting to walk. Okay, so that is the Babinski sign. Finally, we have the ATNR reflex, which stands for asymmetric tonic neck righting reflex. And basically what it is if you put a baby on their back and you turn their head to the side, they should, on the one side where the neck is turned, they should extend that side out. They should flex that side in and extend the other side. So it's often called a fencer's pose. Neck turned to one side, this side should flex, this side should extend. That's also super important for crawling, for walking. So you see how some of these things that are needed within that birth process start to present now. And if we don't really get a great handle on those things, it can lead to issues with development down the road. There's also a really interesting test that they've done a lot of research in. There's a great book by Dr. Malillo that's called Disconnected Kids, and it talks about all of the brain things and why we're having this emergence of all of these neurocognitive and neuropsychosis diagnoses, and it's just because the brain isn't working to the capacity that it was designed to do. Okay. And so with these primitive reflexes, this is how we grow the brain. This is how we make those connections for this task to lead into this task to this task. So a lot of pediatricians don't even test primitive reflexes. Like I said, many of you may have not even heard it, especially if you have newborns. And it's really important that we start to open the conversation about these primitive reflexes because it will tell us what the health of the brain is moving forward. But Dr. Melillo in this book, Disconnected Kids, talks about a really important test that's called pull to sit. So if a baby is laying on their back and you grasp their hands and you start to slightly pull them up, they should start to engage their head, flex the core, and be able to sit up. And if they're not starting to do this by 6 months, it might be an indication that they have low tone. Low tone in the chiropractic world and in the medical world starts to say, hey, brain is not working as well as it needs to. So that's one of the great things about chiropractic care is that we talk all about the nervous system. And, we've talked in the past before about why kids need chiropractic care, why babies need chiropractic care. And the reason is because it's about nervous system health and it's about brain health. If we're not doing the things to wake up the brain, to help the brain form these new neural pathways and the connections, developmental issues are only going to be delayed even further. And we're going to have more and more kids who are super unhealthy and can't do basic things in life because we're not doing a good job of taking care of the brain. Chiropractic is a great way to wake up these systems. And we have seen that people who don't have some of these primitive reflexes, once they start under care, these primitive reflexes integrate the way that they're supposed to, they show, and then they disappear as they need to, as they start to develop those big life skills. Okay, so if you have a newborn, try that pull to sit test. By 6 months, they should be doing it primarily on their own with a little bit of guidance. And if they're not, it would be a great time for your kiddo to get checked and get some chiropractic care so we can wake up that brain and help that formation as best as possible. So why are all these things important? And the reason is that if we look at the research, the CDC back in 2022 changed those developmental milestones. They pushed them back. They've delayed them. A number of years ago, they said that crawling, you should expect in your newborn between 6 to 8 months of age. Did you know that in 2022, they said that babies don't even need to crawl anymore? It's no longer a milestone. That's a problem because crawling is essential to get that cross-body pattern within the brain in order to walk and to do these cross-body mechanisms and to throw and to do all of the things that kids need to do on a daily basis. And so if we're not highlighting the importance of crawling, we're never going to get to the fact that walking is a thing. Walking, they used to say that your child should be able to do it by 12 months. They have now pushed it back to 15 months, okay? Another important milestone that they've delayed. It used to be that kiddos should be able to say about 50 words by 2 years of age. And now they're saying it's okay if they don't say 50 words until about 2.5 years. So do you see how we're pushing back and we're pushing back and we're excusing the fact that our kids are slower and the brain isn't developing the way that it needs to? So we really need to do a great job of waking up that brain, that nervous system, and chiropractic is a great way to help that brain develop the way that God designed it to. So if you have any questions at all about primitive reflexes, our office is a great place to get some information. And we really want to make sure that we're doing the best care for our kids as possible so that we don't have to worry about all of those neurodevelopmental issues in the future. I hope you have a great rest of your day and thank you for joining us.